Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue-green planet grow larger on the main screen. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the primitive world below. Earth, the locals called it. Such a simple name for what would soon become another jewel in the hegemony's crown. The Third Conquest Fleet had traveled for months to reach this distant system. 17 worlds had fallen before them in the past century. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Arrive, demand surrender, destroy a few cities when they refused, then accept their submission. It was efficient. It was clean. It worked. Admiral, his communications officer chirped from her station. We are receiving multiple transmissions from the surface. The inhabitants appear to be aware of our presence. Vextar's mandibles clicked together in amusement. Of course they were aware. The hegemony wanted them to be aware. Fear was an excellent tool for encouraging quick surrender. Display their military capabilities, he ordered. The main screen shifted to show a tactical overview of Earth's defenses. Vextar studied the data with growing confidence. Nuclear weapons, but primitive ones. Chemical rockets that barely reached their own moon. Radio communications that leaked signals across space like a child shouting in the dark. Their technology level? He asked. Approximately 200 years behind hegemony standards, sir. They have recently achieved basic spaceflight and crude atomic weapons. No energy shields, no faster-than-light travel. No particle beam weapons. Vextar nodded. It was exactly what he had expected. The long-range scouts had been thorough in their assessment. These humans were barely past the Stone Age by galactic standards. Sir, the communications officer spoke again. Should we begin the standard ultimatum broadcast? Proceed. Across Earth, every television, radio, computer, and communication device simultaneously received the same message. The translation systems worked perfectly, converting the hegemony's words into hundreds of human languages. In New York, London, Tokyo, and every other major city, people stopped what they were doing to listen. People of Earth, the message began, you have been selected for integration into the hegemony. Your primitive civilization will benefit greatly from our guidance. You will surrender your planet and submit to our rule. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to comply. Resistance will result in the complete annihilation of your species. On the flagship's bridge, Vextar watched the human communication networks explode with activity. Emergency broadcasts, military alerts, civilian panic. It was all perfectly normal. Every species reacted the same way when they first received the ultimatum. What are they saying? He asked. The communications officer's translator worked for several minutes before responding. The governments are conferring, sir. There appears to be significant debate among their leadership. Some factions advocate immediate surrender. Others are discussing resistance options. Vextar's mandibles clicked again. As a normal, there were always those who believed they could fight the hegemony. They learned better quickly enough. Any military movements? Yes, sir. Their naval vessels are moving to defensive positions. Their aircraft are being dispersed. Ground forces are mobilizing. Standard pre-surrender posturing. The admiral settled into his command chair to wait. 72 hours was the traditional time limit. Long enough for the target species to understand the hopelessness of their situation. Short enough to prevent them from developing any truly dangerous response plans. He had used this same period of waiting to study the previous 17 worlds. Each species had its own culture, its own art, its own way of understanding the universe. The hegemony preserved what was useful and discarded the rest. It was efficient. It was practical. Humans, he learned, were remarkably similar to many other species. They lived in tribal groups that had grown into nations. They fought among themselves frequently. They had art, music, literature. They even had religions that spoke of defending their world from outside threats. Curious, Vextar murmured as he reviewed the cultural data. They have numerous fictional accounts of invasion scenarios. Stories about defending their planet from external threats. His tactical officer looked up from his station. Sir, these humans have spent considerable time imagining conflicts like this one. Their entertainment is filled with stories about fighting invaders from space. A common fantasy among primitive species, sir. They often imagine threats from beyond their world. Vextar nodded, but something about the human stories bothered him. In most species' invasion fantasies, the aliens were defeated through luck, superior morality, or divine intervention. Human stories were different. In human stories, the aliens were defeated through violence, cunning, and willingness to pay any price for victory. Sir, The communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We are receiving a response from Earth. Exactly 72 hours had passed. Vextar straightened in his chair. This was always the most important moment. How a species chose to surrender often determined how much resistance they would offer during the integration process. Display the message. The main screen shifted to show a simple transmission originating from Earth's primary government centers. No elaborate speeches, no desperate pleas, no offers of negotiation. A single word appeared on the screen. No. The bridge fell silent. Vextar stared at the display, certain there had been some translation error. Confirm the message, he ordered. The communications officer worked frantically at her station. Sir, the translation is correct. The humans have transmitted a negative response. They are refusing to surrender. Vextar felt a flicker of something he had not experienced in decades. Uncertainty. In 17 previous conquests, no species had ever responded with a simple refusal. There were always conditions, requests for time, attempts at negotiation. Never just no. Perhaps they do not understand the consequences, his tactical officer suggested. Should we demonstrate our capabilities? Before Vextar could respond, another message arrived from Earth. This one was longer but still remarkably simple. We understand your capabilities. We understand the consequences. Our answer remains no. If you wish to take our world, you will have to fight for it. The Admiral's four hands clenched into fists. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever shown such casual disregard for overwhelming odds. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Sir, his sensor operator called out, I am detecting unusual activity throughout their solar system. Specify. Multiple launches from their homeworld. Dozens of craft heading toward the outer planets. And sir, I am reading massive energy signatures from their moon. Vextar leaned forward in his chair. This was not standard behavior for a species about to be conquered. Most civilizations pulled their forces back to defend their homeworld. They did not send ships away from their planet. Are they evacuating? Negative, sir. The craft appear to be military in nature, and the energy readings from their moon. They are too large to be defensive installations. For the first time in his career, Admiral Vextar felt a cold touch of unease. Something was wrong. The humans were not behaving according to any pattern in the hegemony's vast database of conquest scenarios. Begin the advance, he ordered. All ships proceed to Earth orbit. Prepare for standard orbital bombardment. As the Third Conquest Fleet moved deeper into the human solar system, Vextar studied the tactical displays with growing confusion. The humans had not positioned their forces for a desperate last stand around their homeworld. Instead, they had spread throughout their entire system. It was almost as if they had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The Admiral tried to dismiss the thought. These were primitives. They could not have known the hegemony was coming. They could not have prepared for a conflict of this scale. But as his ships crossed the orbit of the fourth planet from their sun, Admiral Vextar began to suspect that humanity was about to teach the hegemony something new about warfare. The first lesson came when the hegemony fleet reached Jupiter's orbit. Admiral Vextar was reviewing tactical reports when his sensor operator suddenly straightened at her station. Sir, I am detecting multiple objects moving toward us from the asteroid belt. Specify, Vextar ordered, not looking up from his reports. Asteroid collisions were a common hazard in any solar system. The hegemony's shields could easily deflect space debris. Sir, these objects appear to be under power, and they are accelerating. That got the Admiral's attention. He looked up at the main display just as hundreds of red dots appeared on the tactical screen. Each dot represented an object roughly the size of a small moon, moving at incredible speed toward his fleet. Those are not natural asteroids, his tactical officer announced, his voice tight with confusion. Sir, these objects have been modified. I am reading engine signatures, guidance systems, and, sir, they appear to be targeting our ships individually. Vextar stood up from his command chair. In 17 conquests, no species had ever used their asteroid belts as weapons. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. It was brilliant, defensive positions, he ordered. All ships, activate energy shields and prepare point defense systems. The first wave of weaponized asteroids struck the fleet 12 minutes later. The hegemony's energy shields, designed to deflect particle beams and plasma charges, offered no protection against solid rock moving at 20% of light speed. The impact sent shock waves through the entire fleet. Vextar watched in horror as 3 of his heavy cruisers simply disappeared, crushed by mountains of stone and metal that had been turned into guided missiles. The humans had taken the most abundant material in their solar system and made it into the most devastating weapon the Admiral had ever seen. "Damage report," he shouted over the alarms blaring throughout the bridge. 17 ships destroyed, sir. 23 more reporting critical damage. The humans are launching another wave. The second wave of asteroid weapons struck before the fleet could recover from the first. This time the rocks were smaller but faster, aimed at the damaged ships with surgical precision. The humans had clearly studied hegemony ship designs and knew exactly where to hit for maximum damage. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human homeworld." "Display it." A human face appeared on the main screen. The creature looked remarkably similar to several other species the hegemony had conquered, but there was something in its eyes that Vextar had never seen before. It was not fear. It was not desperation. It was satisfaction. "This is Admiral Chen Wei of the Earth Defense Force," the human said in perfectly clear galactic standard. "You wanted to see our capabilities. This is Lesson 1. We turn everything into a weapon." The transmission ended. Vextar stared at the empty screen, his mind racing. The humans had learned galactic standard. They had studied hegemony ship designs. They had prepared for this conflict in ways that suggested they had known it was coming. "Sir," his tactical officer interrupted his thoughts. "The remaining asteroid weapons have passed us. We are clear to continue the advance." Vextar nodded slowly. The fleet had been bloodied, but it was still functional. The humans had shown they could be dangerous, but the hegemony still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Resume: course for Earth. All ships maintain maximum alert status. The second lesson came when they reached Mars. The red planet had appeared empty on long-range scans. The humans had a few small research stations there, nothing that posed any threat to a conquest fleet. But as the hegemony ships entered Mars orbit, the planet's surface suddenly erupted with activity. Launch bays that had been hidden beneath the planet's dust opened like giant flowers. Hundreds of sleek ships poured out of concealed bases, their hulls painted in colors that made them nearly invisible against the red sky. "Where did those come from?" Vextar demanded. "Sir, they must have been underground. The humans have been building a secret military installation on their 4th planet. Our long-range scouts never detected it. The human ships moved unlike anything in the hegemony's experience. They did not form orderly battle lines or follow standard tactical formations. Instead, they swarmed like angry insects, attacking from multiple directions at once." Vextar watched as a squadron of human fighters dove straight into his formation, firing weapons that seemed to ignore his ship's shields entirely. The hegemony vessels returned fire, but the human ships moved with an aggressiveness that made them almost impossible to target. "Sir, their weapons are primitive but effective. They appear to be using kinetic projectiles enhanced with some form of electromagnetic acceleration." "Railguns?" Vextar asked in disbelief. "They are attacking us with railguns?" It was like being attacked with swords by a species that had invented energy weapons. But somehow the primitive human weapons were working. Their projectiles moved too fast for the hegemony's defensive systems to track, and they hit with enough force to punch through military-grade armor. The human attack lasted only 20 minutes, but in that time they managed to destroy 8 more hegemony ships and damage twice that number. When they finally retreated back to their hidden bases on Mars, they left behind a fleet that was beginning to understand it had underestimated its enemy. "Sir," the communications officer said quietly, "another transmission from the humans." Admiral Chen Wei appeared on the screen again. This time she was standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a warship. Behind her, Vextar could see other humans working at stations that looked remarkably similar to hegemony designs. "Lesson 2, she said without preamble. "We learn fast, and we adapt faster." The transmission ended, leaving Vextar staring at his tactical displays with growing unease. The humans had not just built secret bases. They had studied hegemony technology and incorporated it into their own designs. Their ships moved with alien aggression, but they were equipped with weapons that showed a deep understanding of galactic warfare. "Continue to Earth," he ordered, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried at the beginning of the campaign. The third lesson came when they reached Earth's moon. Luna Base had been visible on long-range scans for decades. It appeared to be a simple research station, the kind of primitive facility that species usually built when they first began exploring their local space. But as the hegemony fleet approached, the moon's surface began to change. Hidden weapon emplacements rose from concealed positions. Massive railguns emerged from underground bunkers. Shield generators activated, creating a defensive barrier around the entire moon. "Sir," his sensor operator announced, "Luna Base is not a research station. It is a fortress, and it is armed with weapons that—" "Sir, some of these weapon signatures are reading above hegemony standard." Vextar felt his stomach sink. "Above standard?"
"Yes, sir."
"They appear to have taken our technology and improved it." The moon opened fire before the Admiral could respond. Particle beams that burned brighter than any hegemony weapon lit up space between Earth and its satellite. Kinetic projectiles moving at impossible speeds struck his ships with pinpoint accuracy. But the most unsettling aspect of the lunar defense was not the weapons themselves. It was the humans operating them. Through the chaos of battle, Vextar could see them on his ship's external cameras. Human soldiers in atmosphere suits, working calmly at weapon stations that should have been too advanced for their species to understand. And they were smiling. They were actually smiling while they shot at his fleet. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "the humans are launching boarding pods from the lunar surface." Boarding pods? They cannot be serious, but they were serious. Dozens of small craft launched from the moon, flying straight into the hegemony formation without any apparent regard for their own safety. The pods were crude by galactic standards, little more than armored shells with engines attached. "Sir, the boarding pods are not attempting to land in our docking bays." "They are. They are ramming our hull directly." Vexatar watched in amazement as human soldiers cut their way through his ship's armor, using tools that looked like they had been built in a garage. Within minutes, his crew was reporting human intruders throughout the fleet. "How are they surviving in hard vacuum?" he demanded. "Sir, they appear to be using primitive pressure suits, but they are moving and fighting as if they were in a normal atmosphere." The Admiral pulled up internal security feeds and immediately wished he had not. The humans were not just surviving in the vacuum of space. They were hunting his crew through the corridors of his own ships, using weapons that seemed to have been improvised from industrial equipment. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice shaking, "we are receiving another transmission." Admiral Chen Wei appeared on the screen one more time. She was now clearly aboard a hegemony vessel, standing in a corridor that Vextar recognized as belonging to one of his cruisers. "Lesson 3, she said, and her smile was the most terrifying thing the Admiral had ever seen. "We do not just defend, we attack, and we do not stop until we win." Behind her, other humans were working to secure the captured ship. They moved with the efficiency of a species that had been preparing for this moment their entire history. Admiral Vextar realized that the Third Conquest Fleet was no longer conducting a conquest. Admiral Vextar had studied warfare for over a century. He had read every tactical manual in the hegemony archives. He had conquered 17 worlds using strategies that had been perfected over thousands of years. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for fighting humans. The orbital battle around Earth lasted 6 days, and every day brought new horrors that challenged everything the Admiral thought he knew about combat. On the first day, his fleet should have achieved orbit and begun the standard bombardment pattern. Instead, they found themselves fighting for every kilometer of space against an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable tactical doctrine. Human ships attacked in formations that made no sense. They sent single fighters against entire squadrons. They used cargo vessels as weapons platforms. When their shields failed, they welded metal plates to their hulls and kept fighting. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they rammed enemy ships. "Sir," his tactical officer reported during the second day of fighting, "the humans have stopped using conventional attack patterns. Each ship appears to be operating independently." Vextar studied the tactical display with growing frustration. The human fleet moved like a school of fish, each unit responding to threats without any apparent central coordination. It should have made them easier to defeat, but somehow it made them more dangerous. "How are they communicating?" he demanded. "That is the problem, sir. We have successfully jammed all their communication frequencies, but they continue to coordinate their attacks." The answer came later that day when one of his boarding parties captured a damaged human vessel. Inside, they found crew members using primitive signal lamps to flash messages to other ships. When the lamps failed, they used runners in spacesuits physically traveling between ships to carry orders. It was insane. It was primitive. It worked perfectly. On the third day, Vextar watched a human pilot do something that violated every principle of space combat. The pilot's fighter had lost its weapons and engines, leaving it drifting helplessly toward a hegemony cruiser. Instead of ejecting, the human manually steered his dead ship into the cruiser's engine intake and detonated his remaining fuel. The explosion disabled the cruiser and killed the pilot instantly. As far as Vextar could tell, the human had sacrificed himself for no strategic gain whatsoever. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we are receiving multiple transmissions from the human fleet. They appear to be celebrating. Celebrating what?" "The pilot's sacrifice, sir. They are calling him a hero." Vextar stared at the transmission logs in disbelief. The humans were not just willing to die for their cause. They were eager to die as long as they took enemies with them. It was the behavior of fanatics, not rational military personnel. On the fourth day, the humans demonstrated their most disturbing capability: adaptation. Every tactic the hegemony used was countered within hours. When his ships began using formation patterns that had proven successful against dozens of other species, the humans quickly developed responses that turned those same formations into death traps. "They are learning our tactics faster than our computers can generate new ones," his tactical officer reported. "Sir, it is as if they have been studying galactic warfare for decades." The admiral pulled up intelligence reports on human culture, looking for some explanation for their impossible tactical flexibility. What he found made his blood run cold. Humans did not just study warfare. They lived it. Their entire species was divided into nations that existed in a constant state of potential conflict. Every human culture had military traditions. Every human child grew up playing games that simulated combat. They had been preparing for war their entire evolutionary history. On the fifth day, the humans proved they could be just as creative with defense as they were with attack. The siege of Luna Base should have ended quickly. The hegemony had the firepower to crack the moon's crust if necessary. But the humans had turned their fortress into a maze of interconnected tunnels and chambers that made conventional assault impossible. Vextar's boarding parties found themselves fighting in environments the humans had specifically designed to favor the defenders. Corridors too narrow for hegemony soldiers to move effectively. Gravity wells that disoriented alien physiology. Atmospheric mixtures that were breathable for humans but toxic to other species. "Sir," the leader of Boarding Party 7 reported, "the humans have opened sections of the base to hard vacuum. They are fighting us in spacesuits. That should give us the advantage," Vextar replied. "Our environmental gear is superior." "No, sir. The humans appear to be more comfortable in vacuum than we are. They are using the lack of atmosphere as a tactical advantage." The admiral watched security footage from the lunar battle with growing amazement. Human soldiers moved through airless corridors like they were swimming through water. They used microgravity to perform combat maneuvers that would be impossible in normal atmosphere. They fought with a grace and skill that suggested they had been training for vacuum combat their entire lives. On the sixth day, Admiral Vextar realized he was no longer fighting a conquest. He was fighting for the survival of his fleet. The humans had stopped trying to drive the hegemony away from Earth. Instead, they were systematically hunting down and destroying every ship in his fleet. They moved through space like predators, striking from unexpected directions and disappearing before his forces could respond. "Sir," his sensor operator announced, "human reinforcements are arriving from the outer system." Vextar looked at the tactical display and felt his heart skip a beat. The ships approaching from Jupiter and Mars were not the primitive vessels his scouts had reported. These were sleek, deadly craft that moved with the confidence of a species that had mastered interplanetary warfare. "Where did those ships come from?" he demanded. "Sir, our intelligence was incomplete. The humans appear to have been building a military fleet in secret. These vessels are using hegemony-grade technology, but their design principles are completely alien." The admiral studied the approaching human fleet with the eye of a professional warrior. The ships were smaller than hegemony vessels, but they moved with an aggressiveness that suggested they packed considerably more firepower than their size indicated. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted his analysis, "we are receiving a transmission from the flagship of the approaching human fleet." Admiral Chen Wei appeared on the main screen for the fourth time since the battle began. She was now wearing what appeared to be a hegemony uniform that had been modified with human insignia. Behind her, Vextar could see a bridge that looked like it had been built from salvaged hegemony technology. "Admiral Vextar," she said, and her use of his name sent a chill down his spine. "You have fought well. Your tactics are solid, your weapons are effective, and your crews are brave." The Admiral waited for the ultimatum, the demand for surrender, the terms of his defeat. Instead, Admiral Chen smiled. "But you made one critical error. You assumed that because we are primitive, we are weak. You assumed that because we are young, we are inexperienced. You assumed that because we have never fought a galactic war, we do not understand warfare." She leaned forward, and her eyes held the cold calculation of a predator studying its prey. "You were wrong. We have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We have been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years. Every human culture has military traditions that go back to the dawn of our species." The transmission shifted to show views of the human fleet. Hundreds of ships, all bearing the scars of recent combat, all crewed by soldiers who looked like they had been born for warfare. "You brought 17 years of conquest experience to our solar system," Admiral Chen continued. "We brought 10,000 years of warfare experience to this battle. And now, Admiral Vextar, it is time for your final lesson." The human fleet opened fire, and Admiral Vextar understood that he was about to learn what happens when a species that treats warfare as an art form decides to teach other races about the true nature of combat. The final battle for Earth's solar system lasted 18 hours. When it ended, Admiral Vextar found himself commanding the shattered remains of what had once been the hegemony's third conquest fleet. Of the 200 ships that had entered the Sol system, only 37 remained functional. But the true shock came 3 days later, when human ships appeared in hegemony space. Vextar was aboard his damaged flagship, preparing casualty reports and trying to understand how his conquest had become such a disaster, when his communications officer received an impossible transmission. "Sir," she announced, her voice trembling, "we are receiving a message from the Altair system." "From our garrison there?" Vextar asked without looking up from his reports. "No, sir. From human forces. They are attacking Altair." The Admiral's forehand stopped moving. He looked up slowly, certain he had misheard. "Repeat that." "Sir, human military forces have appeared in the Altair system. They are engaging our garrison fleet. The transmission is requesting immediate reinforcement." Vextar stared at his communications officer in complete disbelief. Altair was 12 light-years from Earth. Humans did not have faster-than-light travel. It was impossible for them to have reached hegemony space. "Display the transmission." The main screen showed a scene of chaos. Hegemony ships burned in space while sleek human vessels moved between them like sharks among minnows. The tactical situation was clear. The Altair garrison was being systematically destroyed. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "we are receiving similar reports from the Procyon and Wolf 359 systems. Human forces have appeared simultaneously in 3 different hegemony territories." Admiral Vextar felt something he had never experienced in his long military career: genuine terror. The humans had not just defended their homeworld. They had somehow launched coordinated attacks across dozens of light-years of space. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" The answer came in the form of another transmission. This one directly from Admiral Chen Wei. She appeared on his screen standing on what was clearly the bridge of a hegemony vessel, but one that had been extensively modified with human technology. "Good morning." "Admiral Vextar," she said pleasantly. "I imagine you are wondering how we managed to travel faster than light." Vextar found his voice. "Your species does not possess faster-than-light technology." "We do now," Admiral Chen replied with a smile that made the hegemony officer's skin crawl. "You brought it to us, along with shield generators, particle beam weapons, and detailed star charts of hegemony territory." The Admiral stared at the screen in horror as the implications sank in. "You stole our technology." "We captured it," Admiral Chen corrected. "Every ship you lost in our solar system, every piece of equipment your boarding parties left behind, every weapon system that fell into our hands during the battle. We studied it all." The transmission shifted to show human technicians working on captured hegemony equipment. They moved with the confidence of engineers who had completely mastered alien technology in a matter of days. Your faster-than-light drives are quite elegant, Admiral Chen continued, but the design has some inefficiencies. We have improved the power coupling by 23% and reduced the navigation errors by half. Vextar felt his world spinning out of control. In 6 days of fighting, the humans had not just captured hegemony technology. They had reverse-engineered it, improved it, and deployed it across multiple star systems. Impossible, he muttered. It takes decades to understand faster-than-light physics. For most species, perhaps, Admiral Chen agreed. But humans have a natural talent for warfare. When we encounter new weapons, we do not just learn to use them, we learn to make them better. The screen shifted again to show human shipyards that had been constructed in the outer regions of the Sol system. Massive industrial complexes worked at impossible speed, churning out vessels that combined human design principles with improved hegemony technology. You see, Admiral, you made a fundamental error in your assessment of our species. You assumed that because we were technologically primitive, we were mentally primitive as well. You never considered that a species capable of developing nuclear weapons, spaceflight, and global communications, in less than a century might be capable of rapid technological advancement in other areas. Vextar watched in fascination and horror as the shipyards produced vessels unlike anything in the galactic databases. The ships were smaller than traditional hegemony designs, but they bristled with weapons and moved with an agility that suggested revolutionary improvements in propulsion technology. But technology was never your real problem, Admiral Chen continued. Your real problem was that you fundamentally misunderstood the nature of warfare itself. The transmission shifted one final time to show a tactical overview of the current military situation. Human forces were not just attacking 3 hegemony systems. They were attacking 17 different targets simultaneously, coordinating their assaults with a precision that suggested decades of planning. You approach warfare as a political tool, Admiral Chen explained. You use it to achieve specific objectives with minimal cost. You fight to conquer, and when conquest becomes too expensive, you retreat and find easier targets. Vextar nodded slowly. It was exactly how the hegemony had operated for centuries. It was efficient, practical, and profitable. Humans approach warfare differently, Admiral Chen said, and her voice carried a note that made every sentient being on the Admiral's bridge unconsciously step backward. We do not fight to conquer. We fight to win, and we do not stop fighting until our enemies are no longer capable of being a threat. The tactical display updated to show the full scope of the human offensive. It was not a series of raids or limited strikes. It was a comprehensive campaign designed to cripple the hegemony's military capacity throughout an entire sector of space. Admiral Vextar, Chen continued, your fleet came to our solar system to teach us about our place in the galaxy. You have succeeded beyond your wildest expectations. We have learned that the galaxy is full of species who view warfare as a limited engagement, with clear rules and acceptable losses. She leaned forward, and her eyes held the cold fire of a predator that had tasted blood. We have also learned that no one in the galaxy understands what total war actually means, until now. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Vextar staring at a blank screen while alarm klaxons echoed throughout his ship. His sensor operator was calling out reports of human ships appearing throughout hegemony space. His communications officer was relaying desperate pleas for help from a dozen different systems. The Admiral sat down heavily in his command chair and tried to process what had happened. In less than 2 weeks, a primitive species had gone from being the target of conquest to launching the most successful military offensive in recorded galactic history. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly, what are your orders? Vextar looked at the tactical displays showing the systematic destruction of hegemony forces across multiple star systems. He thought about the human smile he had seen in Admiral Chen's eyes, the casual way she had spoken about improving hegemony technology, the terrifying efficiency with which her species had turned a defensive war into a galactic offensive. Send a message to Hegemony Central Command, he said finally. Tell them we need to discuss surrender terms. For the first time in the hegemony's 1,000-year history, they were the ones asking for mercy. The peace negotiations took place aboard a neutral space station in the Vega system, 6 months after the war had officially ended. Admiral Vextar sat across a polished table from Admiral Chen Wei. studying the human who had orchestrated the most devastating military defeat in hegemony history. The terms of surrender were unlike anything in galactic records. Humanity had not demanded tribute, territory, or slaves. Instead, they had requested something far more unsettling: membership in the Galactic Council as a recognized military power. Your terms are generous, Admiral Vextar admitted as he reviewed the documents. His translator struggled with several human concepts that had no equivalent in hegemony language. Admiral Chen smiled, and Vextar was relieved to see that this time it held no predatory menace. We are not interested in conquest, Admiral. We never were. Then what do you want? Understanding, Chen replied simply. For centuries, the hegemony has operated under the assumption that military superiority grants the right to dominate other species. We want the galaxy to understand that this assumption is no longer valid. Vextar studied the human admiral with growing confusion. Despite the burns and scars she had gained during the 6-month conflict, Admiral Chen appeared remarkably relaxed for someone who had just concluded a war that had reshaped galactic politics. You could have conquered us, he said finally. Your forces demonstrated clear superiority. Why offer peace terms instead of demanding our surrender? Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair and considered the question. Tell me, Admiral, what do you know about human history? Very little, Vextar admitted. Our intelligence focused on your military capabilities, not your cultural development. For most of our recorded history, Chen began, humans have been divided into hundreds of separate nations, tribes, and kingdoms. We have fought each other continuously for thousands of years. We developed weapons capable of destroying our entire planet. We created military doctrines based on the complete annihilation of our enemies. Vextar nodded. The hegemony's scientists had detected evidence of extensive warfare on Earth, but they had assumed it indicated a primitive, chaotic society. But we also learned something that most galactic civilizations never discover, Chen continued. We learned that the ultimate goal of warfare is not victory. It is peace, the Admiral frowned. I do not understand. Every war we have ever fought has taught us that defeating an enemy is only the beginning. The real challenge is building a peace that prevents future conflicts. Military victory without diplomatic resolution just creates the conditions for the next war. Admiral Chen gestured to the space station around them, where representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations were observing the negotiations. We could have conquered the hegemony, she said. We could have occupied your worlds, enslaved your people, and taken your place as the dominant military power in this sector. But that would have made us just another empire waiting for someone stronger to come along and conquer us. Vextar began to understand. You prefer to be partners? We prefer to be teachers, Admiral Chen corrected. The galaxy has spent millennia believing that military technology determines who rules and who serves. We want to demonstrate a different approach. She activated a holographic display that showed the current military situation throughout hegemony space. Human forces had withdrawn from all occupied systems, but they had left behind something unprecedented: detailed technical specifications for every weapon system they had developed during the war. You are giving us your military technology? Vextar asked in amazement. All of it, Admiral Chen confirmed. Improved faster-than-light drives, enhanced shield generators, more efficient weapon systems, and complete manufacturing specifications. We want every species in the galaxy to have access to the same level of military capability. The Admiral stared at the technical readouts with growing alarm. But if everyone has the same weapons, how will conflicts be resolved? Admiral Chen's smile returned, and this time Vextar found it oddly reassuring. That is the point, Admiral. When everyone has the same capacity for destruction, warfare becomes too expensive to be profitable. Nations are forced to find other ways to resolve their differences. She activated another holographic display, this one showing a concept that made Vextar's translator work overtime: mutual assured destruction. For centuries on Earth, Admiral Chen explained, the most powerful nations possessed weapons capable of destroying all life on our planet. The knowledge that any major war would result in everyone's death forced us to develop new forms of diplomacy, trade, and cooperation. Vextar studied the human military philosophy with fascination. It was completely contrary to every principle the hegemony had followed for 1,000 years. You make warfare impossible by making it too dangerous. We make conquest impossible by ensuring that every species has the ability to defend itself effectively, Admiral Chen corrected. When military victory becomes impossible to achieve, civilizations are forced to compete in other areas: science, art, culture, trade. The Admiral thought about the implications. A galaxy where no single species could dominate others through military force would be unlike anything in recorded history. There will be resistance to this idea, he warned. Many species have built their civilizations around military expansion. We know, Admiral Chen replied calmly. That is why we are making membership in this new defensive alliance voluntary. Any species that wants to continue pursuing military conquest is free to do so. She activated a final holographic display that showed the current composition of what humans were calling the Galactic Defense Coalition. Over 40 species had already requested membership, but they will be doing so against opponents who have access to the same military technology they do, along with the combined strategic knowledge of every civilization in the alliance. Vexitar realized that the humans had not just won a war, they had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization, and if someone refuses to join this alliance, Admiral Chen's expression grew serious, then they will discover what happens when a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare decides that someone needs to be taught a lesson about the futility of conquest. The Admiral shivered despite himself. He had seen what human military doctrine looked like when applied against an enemy. The idea of facing it again was terrifying. The hegemony accepts your terms, he said formally. Excellent, Admiral Chen replied. Welcome to the future, Admiral Vexitar. I think you will find it much more interesting than the past. As the negotiations concluded and the formal documents were signed, Admiral Vexitar reflected on the events of the past months. The hegemony had come to the Sol system expecting to add another primitive world to their empire. Instead, they had encountered a species that had turned warfare into an art form and then transcended it entirely. The humans had taught the galaxy its final lesson about the nature of warfare. The ultimate victory was not conquest, but making conquest itself obsolete. 6 months later, when the first joint human hegemony patrol encountered a previously unknown aggressive species attempting to conquer a peaceful civilization, Admiral Vexitar watched from the bridge of his new ship as Admiral Chen Wei demonstrated exactly why no one in the galaxy would ever again make the mistake of underestimating humanity. The unknown aggressors surrendered after the first demonstration of what the humans called overwhelming defensive response. The galaxy had learned its lesson well,